Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our commitment is to help, hope, and healing of our veteran family and our nation. I'm Jim Blythe, a U.S. Navy veteran and a certified senior advisor. Join us as we continue the mission of leadership and commitment to our communities and our great country. Why, you never know where we're going to go or who you're going to meet. We invite you to join in, plug in, and share in what we do. This is your Veterans Impact Show.
Welcome aboard. What a great day. Well, actually, it's kind of overcast, rainy, and cold, and a Monday. So rainy days and Mondays aren't going to get me down. Attitude equals altitude. Hey, I'm Jim Blythe, a U.S. Navy veteran, and believe it or not, I have another U.S. Navy veteran, Vietnam era, with me. I'd like to introduce you to Captain Marc Liebman. Marc, welcome aboard, brother.
It's always fun to be with you, Jim. I think this is the umpteenth time I've lost count.
I know.
Done this, and we always have fun.
We always have fun, but I really enjoy your books. And and everybody, oh boy, here he goes. He's going to tell that story again about Cherubs 2 and me calling him up saying, this isn't fiction.
Yes, it was. There is.
No, he is a great writer. 18 published books, 6 on the bestseller list for Amazon. That is amazing. That is terrific. And they're great. I started with the books about Vietnam, and when he was talking about the Oriskany, I go, wait a minute. I was there on the Oriskany when he was talking about that. But it's gone through several evolutions. I love the Age of Sail books, which are historical. The amount of research you do is truly amazing. And I learned so much. And yet this is fiction. I learned so much. So, Marc, tell me about your newest one, Fight We Shall.
Okay, so the Age of Sail series, which I call the Jaco Jacinto Age of Sail series, and that's because Jaco Jacinto is the main U.S. character. It follows the careers of 2 young officers, one in the Royal Navy and one in starts out in the Continental Navy. They meet when Jacinto captures the Brit, Darren Smythe. They become friends because they come from similar backgrounds. And then Smythe is paroled. He's back in the Royal Navy. And now Jacinto and Smythe are mortal enemies again. But their careers and lives begin to intertwine at that point. And as the series progresses, they become friends, even closer, and then allies. And then if you read ultimately all 8 books in the series, you'll find out what happens in the end. Anyway, so Fight We Shall is book 7 of the series. It takes place during the war against the Barbary pirates. And I use the word war against the Barbary pirates, plural, because not only are they based in Tripoli, which is where all the history is supposedly, or we read about, but they're also based across what's known as the North African littoral, going from west to east from Tripoli, then to places like Benghazi and Tunis and Algiers, a place called Bajaya, which is on the Algerian coast. And all these days who own these little city-states like to take ships from countries, and then if they couldn't ransom the crews and the cargo and the ships, they sold the crew into slavery, and then they kept the cargo and the ships for their own use. And in 1801, most Americans don't know that about 20% or more of the federal budget was being consumed by not ransom payments, tribute payments to these Barbary states, the largest of which went to Tripoli. And he was demanding more money, and about twice what he was being paid. And President Jefferson says, no, au contraire, we're not going to do that anymore. And so the day of Tripoli declares war on the United States. Well, Jefferson had a little problem, because when he took over, politically, he was opposed to a standing army and navy, and while John Adams, his predecessor, had begun to build what we now know as the modern U.S. Navy, with the Navy Act of 1794, the famous 6 frigates, of which Constitution, Constellation, United States, Macedonian President, and Congress, if I think I got them all right. And I probably left out Philadelphia, which is...
And one of them still sailing.
Yes, Constitution is still commissioned,
yes,
not just sailing. Anyway, so they had to be brought out of what the Brits called an ordinary. Today we would call it mothballs. And so suddenly the United States was conducting what we now call expeditionary warfare 4,000 miles from its coast. And what's also interesting is we had two allies. One was the Swedes, who had lost many ships to these pirates, offered to provide several frigates. They provided 3, and they were involved with the U.S. squadron for about 2 years. We also had a base, or bases. The Kingdom of Naples and Sicily, or those, depending on which year you refer to it as, gave us, to use the base at what's now known as Syracuse, and also Naples, where we could buy naval stores and food for discounts. We could park our ships there, repair them. So suddenly we had a base in, guess what? In Italy. And so that gave us a base close to the Mediterranean. So Jefferson sent a squadron to change the Bay of Tripoli's mind. And that's where most of the action happened. And ultimately sent a second squadron. But there were still pirates operating in Algiers, Tunis, and Bejaia, and what to do with them. And essentially, they followed the Tripolitans' lead to some degree. However, we did wind up having to deal with them on occasion separately. So what I did in this book, and this is where the fiction starts, is under Admiralty law, and I didn't know this until I started doing this, is Admiralty law is now known as maritime law. At the time, you were allowed to arm a merchant ship. So the British East and West India companies and the Dutch East and West India company ships were all heavily armed. But you could also have escort vessels that you contracted with or owned to protect your merchant ships. Understand the word contract. So you could then hire another firm to provide a naval vessel of some kind to escort your merchant vessels. So what happens in this is I created a fictitious company called Naval Escort Services because the Jacintos are part of a family of traders. They trade internationally. They own a shipping company as well as a company that actually trades in the goods. So they own the ships and they own they're trading in the goods that are carried. And so they create this group called Naval Escort Services, which it gets subsumed into the United States Navy to help protect U.S. merchant ships. So that's kind of the history behind this. And oh, by the way, just as a footnote, again, most history books don't tell you that the war against the Barbary pirates was not just one, it was actually a second one. And the second one occurred in 1815 while the U.S. is embroiled, or just towards the end of the U.S. embroilment with the Royal Navy and the Brits in the War of 1812. And the Day of Tripoli said, hey, and the Day of Algiers said, hey, we want more money because, if not, we'll start taking your ships again because you're involved fighting the Brits. What they didn't know is the treaty again was being negotiated at the time, and very quickly the U.S. Navy changed their minds. And it was a very short war that basically we went out and beat the crap out of them for both the cities, and they said, okay, fine, we're not going to do this anymore. But out of this, a couple of things occurred that are true to this day. So one of the areas, it's now modern Tunisia, decided that it was smarter to trade with the U.S. like the Moroccans, I'll get to them in a second, than it was to fight us. The second big thing that happened, and this is what goes on today, is beginning in 1805, the United States Navy maintained a ship or two in the Mediterranean. It's a practice we still do today. In 2025, although it's varied from it's now known as Sixth Fleet, and there's a lot more than 2 ships. But from the end of the Barbary Pirate Wars, we kept naval ships in the Mediterranean to protect U.S. assets and interests. The Moroccans, which again most Americans probably don't know, signed a treaty of commerce and friendship with the United States in 1787. And it is still in force today. It's been modified 2 or 3 times, but it's basically a commercial treaty, and it's also a treaty in which that if the United States is at war with somebody, our ships can pull into Morocco and enjoy safe haven status to repair and treat their wounded and whatever for as long as they want. And the Moroccans, if an enemy ship shows up, the Moroccans will hold that enemy ship for at least 24 hours after the U.S. ship leaves. By the same, we would do the same thing to the Moroccans in one of our ports. But it's a very interesting treaty. It's got only 25 clauses, and it was negotiated, like I said, in 1786, and signed ultimately, became effective in 1787. And at the time, the U.S. Constitution had not been ratified. And so it was ultimately had to go back and be re-ratified.
Really?
By the current Congress, although it was ratified under the Articles of Confederation. So there's a lot of interesting history of this period of time. It has other implications throughout our history. But one, it was also sending a message to the Brits that we have a competent Navy. It was small. We didn't build ships of the line like the Brits did. It was mostly frigate-based. And the way we kept it afloat, to use my words loosely, is because after the War of 1812, Jefferson immediately defunded the Navy again. It went back to a very small fleet. So what the leaders of the Navy and the Secretary of the Navy at the time did is that they would hire crews, recruit crews. They would go out and they would deploy. They learn how to handle the ship. They'd come back, and they would then be put on half pay, which is the way they did it in those days. And then, but which meant that they were subject to recall. They were essentially naval reservists. And then he would put out. Then the ship would deploy again with a different crew, different set of officers. So suddenly you had a cadre of sailors that were going to sea once every 2 or 3 years for 6 to 10 months, sometimes a year, and then they come back. So when the War of 1812 breaks out and Madison is suddenly faced with having to expand the U.S. Navy, we had the ships, they were in ordinary, and we now had crews. And the U.S. Navy was an ugly surprise to the Royal Navy during the War of 1812. And by the way, the U.S. Navy fought the Royal Navy on the lakes, Lake Champlain, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, on rivers, and in the Atlantic and the Caribbean. And the only times we were ever defeated is when one of our frigates was generally boxed in or outnumbered and boxed in. But the rest of the time, we played havoc with not only the Royal Navy itself, but also His Majesty's merchant fleet. And again, like during the American Revolution, we captured about 12 to 15% of its merchant ships. Now that's going farther beyond the war of the war against the Barbary Pirates when this particular novel takes place. But the next one, Prizes of Opportunity, takes place during the War of 1812, and it will be out sometime in probably first quarter of next year.
How fun. Okay, let me ask you a question. So the second round, you're going to be talking about the War of 1812, and you'll be talking about Lafitte and New Orleans, because that ended the war was when Jean Lafitte aided Andrew Jackson, and they knocked out the British.
Actually, the War of 1812 was over when the Battle of New Orleans was fought. We had already agreed to the terms of the Treaty of Ghent.
Really?
But nobody knew about it. So here's a couple of fun things about the War of 1812. One, there was diplomatic discussions going back and forth between the Brits and the Americans. The three main issues were there were British military units in the Northwest Territories that were instigating the Indians against the settlers. And in fact, the British promised several Indian leaders that an Indian nation would be formed if they defeated the Americans. So that was number one. We knew about that. Number two, there was the impressment of, which is essentially kidnapping American seamen. In other words, a British warship would stop an American merchant ship. They walk on board and say, "You're an Englishman, you're an Englishman, you're an Englishman. You're now impressed into the Royal Navy." And it would be 5 to 10 years if ever you got back. They took about, over a period of 8 or 9 years, about 25,000 U.S. sailors, U.S. citizens.
Slavery.
No, it's kidnapping. I wouldn't call it slavery, but what the U.S. had gone to the extent when this started of providing every sailor with a slip of paper saying this is where you were born, or if you were born in the UK or born in France or born someplace else, this is when you swore allegiance to the United States. And it was also in the ship's logs. And then the third thing was Britain's economic policies. They were requiring U.S. traders to have their ships stop in UK, be inspected for contraband, and then pay a tariff or customs duty for it to allow it to continue onto a port. But if it was going to a port controlled by France, sorry, you can't go there. But anyway, so the English realized that this position was not to their benefit, and they literally had agreed to stop impressment, stop the economic policy, and move out of the forts. And the letter was en route to Madison when he declares war in June of 1812. And of course, now he's declared war, and so that message is going back. And so the war begins. The treaty is signed in Ghent, and again, because it took 6 weeks to get things one side of the Atlantic to the other, the Battle of New Orleans takes place after the treaty was signed.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and by the way, Jean Lafitte was a major help.
Yeah, he was a pirate. He
got a pardon.
He got pardoned, but he also had some very, very experienced French gunners who had served under Napoleon.
Correct.
And so they were able to fire lethal volleys against the Brits, which surprised them. Let's go back for just a half a second, because we're going to take a break in a minute. One of the things about this is I believe that while you write with fiction, and it's so exciting and so much fun, it's also based in a certain amount of fact and history. And in doing that, you're giving us kind of an insight of the culture, insight of what's going on. We have been having problems with the North African, Libya, Algeria. Now, Morocco, I didn't know that we had a relationship with Morocco that's still active today.
Yes.
And then the other thing I didn't know about is we were given ports in Naples and in Sicily that we still have today.
Yes.
Okay.
They're not the same bases, but the fact that we had basing rights and they supported our ships continues to this day. And pretty much it was continued except when Italy joined the Axis. Excuse me, the Axis in World War II. And then for a while they had sided with the Austrian, Hungarians, and the Germans in World War I. Then they switched sides again. But yeah, it's been a couple centuries.
Yeah,
it's just kind of amazing. I want to.
Okay, we're gonna have to take a break.
Okay.
All right. Hey, this is Veterans Impact Show. We're here to bring some fun today and talk about Marc Liebman's books, best-selling books, 8 of them. He's got 18. If you want to know about Vietnam, go take a look at Cherubs 3 and go take a look at Big Mother 40, right?
Cherubs 2, please.
Cherubs 2. I'm sorry.
Get the altitude wrong, Jim. by the way, I'll explain next time.
All right. But the main thing is, you want to learn a little bit about history and culture, go back and read his Age of Sail. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Heart's Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation.
Hey, I am so grateful to have Marc here because I have so much fun with these programs. I do want to take a half a second and thank DBTV Network for putting us around the world on internet TV. We're on Saturdays at 9 o'clock, and we're on Tuesdays at 7 o'clock. And so just check your network with DBTV Network, Amazon Fire, Roku, Spotify, smart TVs. We're on there with you. Join it, share. You can go to YouTube. You can go to Facebook, share. Let people know, because we're all about veterans, taking care of veterans and what veterans are doing. And I want to say also thank you to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, my mortgage company, and my NMLS number is 311-548. Symbios Integrative Health. We do integrative health like nobody else in the United States. We're here in Dallas. We're going to expand across this nation. We're going to help people stay alive and stay healthy. And that you want to know more, go to Symbios, SYMBIOS, CCN.com. And last, Healing Thine Heart Ministries.org. Healing Thine Heart, they do a phenomenal job in marriage counseling. So healingthinehearts.org. Now, all of that said,
I want to plug something here for a second.
Oh, go, please do, Marc.
Okay, so Jim brought up a really good point about culture. So I write a blog. It's available on my website, and it's available in a couple other places, Goodreads and some other places. But anyway, go to my website. You can find it. It's on early American history from the period roughly 1775 to the end of the War of 1812. And I cover things that are not covered in history books. And they're little tidbits about history. They're a quick read. They're typically 500 to 600 words. There's 338 of them because it comes out every Sunday. And yesterday I just wrote the 338th one, if I remember correctly.
Good. I'll get it.
And they're fun to write. But what they are the outcomes or the outgrowth of the research I had to do to write this series, because you have to transport yourself back into this 18th century and understand there's no internet, there's no electricity. You want to have chicken for dinner. Well, I have to go out and get to the chicken coop behind my house, kill the chicken, pick the chicken, kill the chicken, pluck the chicken, cook the chicken, and anything that's left over, I either turn into broth by boiling the bones, or I smoke or salt.
Right.
Okay. And if I want to communicate with you, Jim, if you were in Houston and I'm living in Dallas, I have to do it by letter. And oh, by the way, paper is not only expensive, but under the British, it was taxed.
Well, they did away with the stamp act. But yeah.
But the American Revolution, yes.
Did that. But I got to tell you, if you don't understand where you've been,
you can't figure out where you're going to go.
That's right. And so this gives you an insight. And one of the things is you have some female characters in your book that are amazing. And how you bring that out as a writer. And to anybody who wants to write a book, I'm working on one and I've read his books. He also has some information about writing that you have put out. So
I do. So if you go to my website, which is marcliebman.com, I do a fair amount of speaking on how to write a book. There are a couple tidbits on there. I do coaching. I will not help you write the book. I will basically say, this is what you got to do, and then you got to go do it, nor will I edit it because I don't have the time, nor can you afford me to do that. But I also can help you with throughout the process, which is writing the manuscript, finding out, making a decision on how you want to publish it, and then see how the most difficult part, strangely enough, is to promote it. So I want to come back to the topic of women.
All right, do that.
So another, forehead slapping thing from the research is that if you look at the 13 colonies in 1775, there's roughly 2.5 million souls. About 400,000 of them were enslaved. About 50,000 were free slave, and the rest were other. Just leave it as other. And I'm not talking about the Native Americans. And at any one time, about 30% were either in the Royal Army, British Army as loyalists, or the Continental Army or the Continental Navy. So if you are married to another woman and your husband and you as the male are off playing war, either for the British or the Americans, who's going to run the store? Well, the women. So and the same thing with the choose a farm or anything else. So what you start to see by the end of the American Revolution was women wanted to get out of the traditional role of raising children, keeping the home, what the Germans called Kinderkirche, Kuche, church. Anyway, so what I did is I created 5 women characters that appear throughout the series. One wanted to become a doctor, one wanted to become a lawyer, another one wants to become a professor of languages, and there's some other professions. And I take them through as tier 2 characters of that struggle. Because, for example, if you wanted to be an attorney, you had to apprentice, and you were a woman, you had to apprentice yourself to a law firm because you couldn't go to law school because they didn't take women. And then at some point in time, you would stand in front of a group of other lawyers and they would grill you on your knowledge of law. And then if you passed, you could theoretically become a member of the bar. Doctors, it was similar to the same thing because you couldn't go to medical school, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, those struggles are in this book because, again, by the early 1800s, you start to see U.S. universities begin to admit women. The other thing that, again, blew me away is that we inherited English law, pretty much, lock, stock, and barrel. It changed in the colonies over time, but it was still pretty much English law. And divorces were very difficult. And in England, if a woman wanted to divorce her husband, she had to have 3 instances of qualifying instances. Adultery is one, battery was another, but she had to go to Parliament to get the marriage annulled. And also, oh, by the way, the moment she said I do, her dowry, her children, all her possessions, essentially her body was a property of the husband. And so this is a pretty ugly situation, which the American women of this period began, I hate to use the word rebel against, but that's a good word.
They changed it.
Yeah. So
But it
one
took
of the
till the
driving
1920s.
Yeah. One of the driving forces that caused this change, not only in divorce law, but is under English law, women couldn't own property. Well, in the late 1790s, right after the first patent office, the U.S. Patent Office was created, a woman in Massachusetts applies for and is awarded a patent. What is patent? A
Property.
patent. It's a piece of property. She couldn't own it. It had to be issued it was issued in her name, but she couldn't have the title to it. So she sued. She wins in court.
Well, good. All right, we're going to take a break right quick. This is Veterans Impact Show. We're all about helping you, the veteran, get to know other veterans as well. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Heart's Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation.
Hey, Mark, this is fascinating. Talking about writing, because I've done a little bit of it. I'm working on it. But you've got some more really great books we've talked about just a little bit that are coming up in the next year.
Yeah, one of the most difficult things about my website is to keep the what's coming or the books and work section up to date. It's way out of date right now. And as I was prepping for this show, I realized that, and I got to go fix that. So next year, besides the eighth book and the Age of Sail series, I'm going to publish a book called The Racing Assassin. It follows a character, Janet Pulaski or Janice Goodrich, who's an assassin. Starts with Forgotten, which is then there's the Red Star Death, and then this one where she's lured or coerced out of retirement, and now what she started under the Red Star Death will be finished in The Racing Assassin, and then she's going to go back into retirement. But that's one. Another one that's interesting. I get asked all the time, have I written any World War II novels? And the answer is no, not yet.
Why not?
Well, because for a while I thought there were just way too many of them out there, and people said, "Oh no, we're always looking for good novels." So I've got another book called Retribution. It starts in World War II, and it's about a Nazi SS officer who is a wanted war criminal at the end of the war. He changes his identity. He goes he goes to law school and becomes an attorney in Austria and marries, has a kid, blah blah blah. And he's trying to live out his life and not be arrested for war crimes. Then you've got an American fighter pilot who is involved. He's stationed in Germany. You have a Russian who's a member of the NKVD. He defects to the Israelis because the Russians stopped hunting Nazis in the late 1900s, 1948, 49. And so he winds up going to Palestine, fighting in the War of Independence. And then there's another kid, a German kid who's secreted out of Germany in 1936. He's Jewish, and he winds up in Palestine as a program under what was known as Aliyah Bet, which is a way of getting male kids, teenagers out of Nazi Germany to Palestine so to survive and keep the religion going. Anyway, so you have these four men, and as the novel progresses, the hunt for the gentleman who was originally known as Matthias Schopp as an SS officer, then Stefan Taylor as an Austrian citizen, begins to intensify. And I get into Odessa and how it protected Nazi officers, or SS officers mostly, who were wanted for war crimes. I get into how they're hunted, a whole bunch of interesting issues. It's called Retribution. I'm hoping to have it out the second half of next year. So those are two books that I know that will be ready in next year, along with Prizes of Opportunity. But then this whole idea of World War II novels has kind of been rattling around in my brain. So I started outlining and noodling around as I do, and I decided about a month and a half ago to write a novel about World War II that takes place entirely during the war. And I picked the period 1939 to 1942 for the first one. It's got the title will probably change, but it's already changed once. It's now The Devil with a Forked Tail, and that's a takeoff on the forked tail devil, which is the German nickname for the P-38 fighter. So it's about an American who becomes a fighter pilot and flies P-38s. On the other side of the table, there's a German fighter pilot who is sent to North Africa after being in the Condor Legion and fighting in France and Battle of Britain. And so they become the major adversaries, or will ultimately become the major adversaries in the book, which will conclude sometime in late 1942 after the invasion of North Africa. And that one, when I started writing it, this is what the thing is, I'm about 3/4 the way right into the first draft. It's turning into War and Peace, and in terms of length. So what I've decided to do is pull parts of it out. I haven't done that yet. I'm going to finish the draft, see how long it is, and then shorten it, get down to about what I think is a decent length novel, which is around 120, 130,000 words. And so I'm going to do another one that's got a working title called Skip Bomber, and it's going to trace. I'm going to use the 34th Bomb Squadron, 17th Bomb Group, which is what my father flew in World War II on his first tour, as the model for how a unit's formed, how it goes off to battle, and its first year in North Africa, which was his first tour during World War II, as the backdrop. And I've got traitors and I've got cowards and other people in that the outline of the story, and that will go pretty quickly. But it has been an absolute ball because I get to write about flying airplanes and dogfights and researching airplanes and reading about them. So it's been consuming. But anyway, I'm hoping to have the first one of those out by the end of the year, because I'll finish it hopefully by the end of this year, and I'll sit on it for a couple months, then start editing it, and I'll probably have to pull it apart and take pieces out. And then there even may be and what I think is going to happen is going to be a third book in there, because as part of this, the way I created the ancestry of one of the characters, the American, I wound up researching a lot about the Poles who fled Poland after the occupation or at the end of the German assault and Russian assault, and what happened to them. And it's been fascinating. I discovered, again, these are the rat holes you go down. I discovered how the Poles secreted 82,000 kilos of gold out of their national bank and got it out of Poland, and then ultimately wound up some in the UK and some in Canada for the duration of the war. And it's an interesting story because they actually did it in early August, under the nose of the Germans, and also, they get it into Romania via truck. Now, imagine 82,000 pounds of gold is 40 tons. It's not exactly something you're going to put in the back.
No, that's a good-sized truck.
Yeah, it's a good-sized truck.
Or group.
Particularly in that day, it's a dozen trucks. And so they get it to the Romanian port of Constantia, I believe is the correct pronunciation. And magically, a British merchant ship shows up in port with space to take the cargo. And then they can't get it through the Dardanelles because the Turks, you have to show a manifest, and the Turks, they don't want to lie to the Turks, but the Turks says, no, you can't do this. And the Germans are pushing the Turks to get the gold because by now they've occupied Poland. Or how the hell do you get the gold off the merchant ship? They then secret it onto a train, take the train from Constantinople or Istanbul down to Syria, which was occupied at this point, because it's before May 1940, is occupied by the Free French, or by France.
That's right. Yeah.
Syria and Lebanon is French. So they get it to France, and then it's loaded on a ship and it's secreted away. And then, of course, Lebanon, Syria, after the fall of France, become Vichy. And that's another whole thing, how the Brits, a lot of people don't know, in May 1941, invade Syria and Lebanon. They also had to deal with a coup in Iraq, and they overthrew that because the Iraqi leader signs up, wants to be a fan of, align himself with Hitler, and Stalin didn't like that either because Lend-Lease was coming through was one of the ways it was coming through Iraq to the Soviet Union. So there's a whole bunch of things you just learn as you dive into the history. So as I tell people in writing the first draft of any novel, the Age of Sail ones, it's typically about 60% of my time is spent research. And this one, normally it's about 50% in the first draft, and then it drops off as I editing, because if I got to fix things or adjust things, I do. But it's been fine. Like I said, it's been education. It drives my wife nuts because I go into my office and I start working. Well, what are you doing? You're not writing. Well, no, I'm researching. Not even. But I am. I'm looking at something on the internet, or I've ordered a book, which is another thing. Is just the number of books I have on the Age of Sail, and just had a sailing ship of that period. It would cover this table easily in 2 layers. And then I have a book from the Age of Sail on the recipes used by the Royal Navy from about 1680 to the Napoleonic era, on how they fed their sailors, which we, by the way, used. We being the Continental Navy and the U.S. Navy.
Wow.
I have the recipes, and there's actually a cookbook which I didn't buy, where it teaches you how to actually make those things. I mean, it's just things like the Articles of War, how the U.S. adopted the English Articles of War, which have pretty draconian punishments. Pretty much out of the 35 articles, rather, I think 20 some of them punishable is death for conviction. It's pretty, again, discipline on a Royal Navy ship was not fun. But anyway, the research is probably the most fun of it, besides the actual writing. And then again, like I said, I get to write about.
Okay, what if I throw you a huge curveball? Okay, I know.
I can hit a curveball.
I know you can. You are of Jewish faith.
Correct.
I have a question, because I saw a documentary about the American Revolution, and it was on PBS, and they were talking about
the Ken Burns series.
Huh?
The Ken Burns series.
I think so, yeah. And they're talking about how America at that time was one of the most diversified populations in the world. You had the Native American Indians, and you had several confederations of Native American tribes that were on the East Coast that were very well educated and had their own languages. Then you had people coming in from the Caribbean, and you had some Indians from India. You had some Englishmen. You had Germans. You
French.
had a lot of Huguenots, French.
French Huguenots, correct.
Okay, question. Were there a number of Jewish immigrants into the United States starting in the 1600s?
The answer to that question is yes, and this is a longer answer than you probably expected. The largest Jewish communities in the beginning of the American Revolution were in Savannah and in Charleston, South Carolina.
Really?
And there are about 2,000 families in each, and they were also the wealthiest community among some of the wealthiest Americans. There was another large community in Philadelphia. There was, and this began to change during immigration in the early 1800s, but until about 1820, Savannah, Charleston, Richmond, Philadelphia were the largest Jewish communities. There are a number of American Jews, whether they're immigrants or born in the United States, born in the 13 colonies, who participated in the American Revolution. For example, David Franks was Washington's aide, his primary aide. He and Alexander Hamilton essentially were Washington's chief of staff. Franks was sent to Paris to escort the Treaty of Paris back. That's how much Washington thought of him.
Wow.
There was, and then there was a gentleman by the name of Chaim Solomon, who, along with a guy by the name of Robert Morris, essentially raised the money to fund the American Revolution that was contributed domestically. Now, the American Revolution, you have to understand that the Continental Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, could not raise taxes. So they had to go to the states to ask for money, and the states basically said, "Piss up a rope." So the revolution was funded from 3 sources: loans from foreign governments, the Netherlands, France, Spain, from U.S. citizens or American citizen members of 13 colonies. So what Solomon and Morris did is they went around to their wealthy friends and got them to donate money on the promise of giving them bonds that they would get paid back, which, by the way, were never paid back. And then the last thing was prize money. Again, American privateers captured about 12 to 15% of the British merchant fleet. And so when that's sold off, the Continental Congress got 10%. So those are the primary sources of money. There are, and I've done a whole I can do a whole presentation on them, but there are significant numbers of American Jews who participate either in on active duty in the military itself, and as shooters, infantrymen, whatever, or sailors. There were some politicians, and I'll get to my favorite one here in a second. And there were also some generals. There was a Canadian, a man born in Canada who came to the United States, was favored of revolution, independence for Canada, because he was of French ancestry and did not like the Brits. And he ultimately became a brigadier general. Alexander Hamilton, again, most Americans don't know. If you don't believe me, go read a book called The Jewish World of Alexander Hamilton. His mother was Jewish. His father was a Dane, and after he was born, his mother wanted to send him to school on the island he was born on. Because he was a mixed race, a mixed religion, the English parochial schools wouldn't take him, so they went to the Akiba, which is a Jewish religious school, just like a Catholic school on the island, and he learned Hebrew. And when he arrived in the United States, he spoke fluent Hebrew. He spoke Latin, or he could read and write Latin, spoke English and German fluently. He's a brilliant man.
Yes, he was.
But he walked away from his religion until he dictated 15 words to James Madison, who actually, it's in his hand that the Constitution was written. And the First Amendment is, Congress shall make no law concerning the rights of religion, whatever it says, the first 15 words of the First Amendment.
Well, that was the big thing.
That came out of Hamilton's mouth.
About the United States is we were populated primarily for many years by Europeans who were fleeing religious persecution, who were fleeing the domination of a very small, maybe 2% of the population. Correct. That were the wealthy landlords, and all the laws and everything was favored to them, not to the little guy.
Yeah, so three things you have to understand is, number one, the Continental Army and the Continental Navy, about the Ken Burns series uses the number 5,000. I think that's an accurate number if you want to go at any one time. But about 20% of the Continental Army, Continental Navy were freed slaves.
Yeah.
Or Indians, but mostly freed slaves. Why did people come to the United States? During the American Revolution, even though that about, if you include the British losses and American or Loyalist losses and American losses to disease and combat and everything else, it's about 200,000 or 300,000, which is a population of 2.5 million. It's pretty significant. But the census of 1770 by 1780, we were well north of 3.5 million, and we were 5 million 10 years later, and we were 7 million by the turn of the century. And so this growth is not organic. It's not having, a lot of people had large families in those days, 7, 8 kids, partly because if you had 7 kids, only 4 or 5 reached adulthood. But so it's immigration. And it's immigration from all over the place. All over the world.
We had every culture. And that was so, I was sitting there thinking, we have been the most diversified country in the world.
Yeah,
and when you mention slaves, not only were slaves coming from Africa, there were many coming from Ireland and other places. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back after these words. We're here for you. Share. Join us. Be a part of Veterans Impact Show. Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Heart's Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation.
I want to make a point about immigration.
All right, I got to bring this ship back into the dock, so we've only got a few minutes. What were you saying, Mark? I'm sorry.
Okay, so a couple things. One, you can go to my YouTube channel. It's just type my name in it, or you can get to it from my website. But you You can see all my YouTube videos. I do stuff on foreign affairs. I do stuff on what I call living history, and you can watch some of those videos. I also, my blog is easily available on my website, just as Mark's blog. If you're into aviation, there's a thing called From the Hack Seat, particularly, which is from the helicopter aircraft commander's seat. It's all about flying helicopters. And there's another one, fun and dumb things I've done in airplanes. And because if you haven't done something that's dumb in an airplane, you haven't flown very much. Anyway, but I want to come back to what Jim was talking about here in a second. The 13 colonies was a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of immigrants, and we have been struggling with immigration. And I use the word struggling not in a sense that it's bad. It's just struggling how to manage it since the 1780s. The first immigration laws were actually passed during the Articles of Confederation by the Continental Congress, but the current Congress, we started in 1794, 1797, 1798, 1802, and I can keep going on and on and on. And it's always boiled down to three things, three things. Who do we let in? How do we vet them? And what's the path to citizenship? Okay, those are the three core issues. What has changed, because I've actually sat down and studied this, what has changed over 250 years is the context and why the citizens, the immigrants, are coming here. So in the 1790s, early 1800s, it's Europe as a flame, the French Revolutionary Wars and the Napoleonic Wars. And then it's a famine in Ireland. The British government was literally paying Irish citizens to get on a boat, tell us where you want to go, we'll buy the ticket, give you the passage, bye. I mean, it goes on and on like that. And so you have the persecution and famines and disease, and the fact that we had something that you could not get unless you were nobility in Europe, and that was land. Okay,
you could own land.
You could own land. You could pick and choose the profession you wanted to be. So if you were a cooper in Germany, Cooper's a barrel maker. So if you were a barrel maker in Germany and that's what your father did, that's what you were going to do. What happens if I don't want to be a barrel maker? Or worse, the prince, if you were living in any of the German city-states, the prince can come up to you and say, Jim, you're in the army now, and you're going to go fight for the British in North America. Well, oh, by the way, about 20% of the Germans that came here as part stayed. They either deserted or when they were captured said, I don't want to go back to Germany. But my point is that we offered freedom of choice, freedom of religion, land, and the freedom of choice means you can be whatever the hell you want to be. And what counted in the United States in those days and still does to this day is how good you are at what you do. Performance counts. That's why you've been successful. That's why I've been successful. Anybody successful, I hate to use the word meritocracy because we're gotten away from that, but we are founded on as a country as a meritocracy.
There's no doubt about that. One of the other things is the people who came here wanted to come here, and this was the land of opportunity. They were trying to build. Yes, there were some scalawags. Yes.
Always are.
Always are. Some of Newgate Prison got emptied out into Georgia. But I got to tell you, we had a work ethic. We had across the board as a culture, you had to work. You had to do something. You had to create. So here's the thing, too. None of these people came here with the idea of taking the country down. None of these people came here with the idea of, well, I tell you what, if you don't believe what I believe, you're dead. I'm going to chop your head off. Here's a big problem we've got. Now we're getting into a political, but we're going to go ahead and say it. Because you have read the Quran, I have read the Quran. I understand there are great people. I've got some friends that are Muslims. I don't think they really look at the Quran the same way we did when we read it, where, as you said, 7 places it says kill the infidel. The people who came here did not come here to start killing everybody, except the settlers, Americans, ended up having to kill the indigenous. That was not a good deal.
Yeah, so I come back to, there are some people who say the United States was built on conquest, and to some degree it's true. But then again, if you look at it throughout history, and peoples have conquered other peoples throughout history, you can go back to the Egyptians, the Ottomans, the Byzantines, the Crusaders, Genghis Khan. I mean, it's just it's the nature of human life or humanity. But the people who came here, and you think about this for a second. I have a father-in-law who came here like this. You get on a boat, knowing as a young man, knowing you think about this in the 1800s or earlier. Get on a boat, not a penny to your name. Come to the United States, walk on to an immigration center, whether it's Ellis Island and Galveston, which, by the way, brought in more people than Ellis Island or came through, and standing in front of this immigration officer, and he doesn't like you, you're going back in a boat going home. Okay? If you don't pass the cursory physical, you're on a boat going home. And so it takes a fair amount of gumption. And then it takes an awful lot of gumption to get on a wagon train in St. Louis of 20 or 30 Conestoga wagons and know in 2 years you're going to get to California. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
And so it's that spirit and that will to make a better life is why these people came and what made this country great.
Well, I tell you what, this has been a great conversation today. I like to close with a prayer, so I'm going to make it short, sweet, and to the point. Lord God of the universe, we just thank you for these wonderful opportunities to hear about history and get to know other veterans. We thank you, God, for our veterans, for all they do to lead, to teach, to mentor, and to bring this nation back together. Thank you, dear God, for putting a hedge of protection around our active duty military as well as our first responders, those that run into the fire instead of away from it. And dear God, we're so thankful that you are helping us to bring this nation back together, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Thank you so much, dear God. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Amen.
Mark, what a great day. I tell you what, we're gone.